You're listening to Bad Dog Agility, bringing you training tips, interviews, and news about the great sport of dog agility.
I'm Jennifer.
I'm Esteban.
And I'm Sarah, and this is episode 246.
Today's podcast is brought to you by 1TDC.com. Dog agility can be hard on your dog's body. Help keep their joints and muscles healthy with 1TDC. 1-tetradecanol complex is a clinically studied blend of unique fatty acid oils that can support your dog's joint health. 1TDC provides a healthy inflammatory response from head to tail. All of our listeners will automatically qualify for a great 1TDC special offer by purchasing online at BDA1TDC.com. That's BDA, the number 1, TDC.com.
Today's podcast is also brought to you by hititboard.com. Hititboard.com has the innovative training tools you need for agility. Having problems with the dog walker A-frame? The Hit It board can fix that. Your dog doesn't like tugging? They'll love the Tug It. Can't move your A-frame around by yourself? The Move It can. Go to hititboard.com and use discount code BDA10 to get 10% off your order. That's hititboard.com. Today, we're going to be answering the question, is it better to react or anticipate in dog agility? And when I ask this question to myself, alarm bells go off. I feel like whenever an instructor asks you a question, the answer is always, it depends. And the answer to this question is, it depends. And so we want to talk today about when it is better to be reactive in your handling and when it is better to anticipate. And a idea that I think we have to talk about first is the idea of mental and physical commitment for the dog. And we do have an entire podcast on this, so I'm just going to kind of give you the Cliff Notes version, but I would recommend going back and listening to that podcast, and it will be in the show notes. So when we talk about commitment in dog agility a lot, right? If your dog is committed to an obstacle. But there's really two different kinds of commitment. There's physical commitment, which means the dog is physically committed to taking the obstacle. And if we kind of think about like the semantics of that sentence, like what that means is that the dog has to continue taking the obstacle. They are literally doing the thing. They aren't thinking about doing the thing. They are literally doing the thing. And so physical commitment is going to be very similar among dogs. It's going to be stride dependent, but it's going to be very similar among dogs. Like when a dog gathers for a jump and has that weight shift back, they are physically committed to taking that jump. Certainly when their feet leave the ground, they are physically committed to taking that jump, for instance. And that's not going to change no matter how experienced your dog is. But then we have the idea of mental commitment. And this is what is more important in agility, because if we go around waiting until our dogs are in the air before we tell them where to go, we're not going to have very many good agility runs, right? And so mental commitment is when the dog decides that they're going to take something and they have decided enough that you can go ahead and do other things in your handling, and they're going to finish that obstacle. They're going to take that jump. They're going to take that tunnel. And what we find in a dog's career is that typically dogs start off where they don't have very good commitment for obstacles. And so their mental commitment is very close to their physical commitment. They pretty much decide to take the obstacle just a little bit before they actually take the obstacle. And that's why we so often see dogs, inexperienced dogs, pull off of obstacles when handlers are running a course. And so if we take a step back from that idea of physical and mental commitment, then we can talk a little bit about reacting or anticipating in your handling. And when you are working with an inexperienced dog, you often have to be very reactive in your handling because of that short distance between that mental and physical commitment. So you have to see your dog get ready to take an obstacle before you can really do anything else. And the thing that I really wanted to highlight here is that as the dog gains more experience, they're going to have a better mental commitment, and you can start to anticipate instead of react. And I think that a lot of people get stuck in this reactive mode of handling, even, well after their dog is mentally capable of them moving on to the next part of the course a little bit sooner. So Jennifer, I'm sure in live classes, you have like a spectrum of students that are very new to the sport, students that have been running their particular dog for years and years, they're in the master's level. And do you kind of see that play out in your classes?
Yeah, I think your comment with regard to the fact that a lot of people will start out in a very reactive state and not progress and not advance to that kind of anticipation state is huge. It's very common for people to want to, see the dog physically clear the jump to believe that the dog is actually going to do it. So if you're waiting for that physical commitment and the dog has already made the decision to take the jump or go into the tunnel or whatever, you are now essentially kind of reacting your handling. And I think we all, as you said, we all kind of start there because the dogs are young. And not only do they, as a young team, do they have that later point of mental commitment, but sometimes it's just the dog and the handler kind of learning each other and figuring each other out. They're still watching you. You're still watching them. It's different running your 8-year-old dog versus your 18-month-old dog. And so we all kind of start that way, but then you've got to get to the point where as the dog's understanding, as their confidence increases and their mental commitment becomes earlier, to move into that anticipation kind of gap there and progressing forward on the handling to be able to say, I've cued that. I know my dog is going. I anticipate that is going to be the reaction that I get and go ahead and move forward with the handling, whether it be, a lateral send or a forward send or, front cross, rear cross, whatever it is, really moving on to that anticipation stage of things. And I think a lot of people get trapped. They are so reactive and they don't move out of that onto that anticipation stage.
Right. And I think that when you are in that reactive stage, almost by definition, you're not giving your dog information about what's coming up because you are waiting until they're doing the thing you just told them. But with good handling, the thing that they're doing now, how they do that is affected by where they should be going next. So when a dog is taking a jump, for instance, they don't take every jump the exact same way, right? If they're taking the jump and the next obstacle is in a straight line, they're going to take the jump one way. If they're taking the jump and the next jump is a wrap back, they should be taking that jump a completely different way. And so if you're waiting until the dog is in the air to tell them whether the next jump is straight ahead or whether the next jump is behind them, you're not allowing them to differentiate there. You're not allowing them to change how they take the current obstacle to best set themselves up for the next obstacle. And I think that one word that we hear a lot in agility is trusting your dog. And this is just another way of thinking about that. Like the idea of trusting your dog is to say, I trust my dog is going to take this jump while I move ahead and get into position for some complex handling that's happening after the jump, right? And so that trust is just another word for I'm going to anticipate a correct performance on my dog's part because I've trained it and because I have enough handling between the two of us to know that they're going to be able to handle that particular situation. And now I'm going to move on to the next part of the course. And I think that this is the key to clear handling. Right? Our dogs have to know where they're going ahead of time, right? They have to. And so this is the key to all aspects of agility that are timing related, right? In terms of timing, anticipating is much better than reacting. And I mean, that goes for non-agility things, right? Like if you're trying to do some physical skill, like, you know how they have the things where like somebody holds a ruler above your hand and you just have your fingers open and they drop the ruler and you have to try to grab it's like a reaction time game, right?
They do that with like dollar bills.
Yeah, dollar bills. Like you can keep this $20 bill if you can catch it.
Right. And no one can catch it.
Right. And the idea there is you can't possibly react and catch it. You have to anticipate to catch it, right?
Right.
I mean, that's how reaction times work. And so it's kind of the same thing here. We have to anticipate to get that good, solid timing to set our dogs up for everything else that happens on the course.
Mm-hmm. I think there's some obstacles where people do a worse job and they tend to react more and they tend to be really late on stuff. And I think for me, the big one is probably the tunnel. There's just something very satisfying about watching your dog go into the tunnel. And so when I'm running a nice big straight line and they're going into the tunnel, I'm seeing my dog enter the tunnel. And that's probably the one obstacle where a dog, you can teach a dog to commit pretty well, but almost nobody does it.
Right. I was going to say that's ironic because
it's very ironic. And then what happened was when we started, really focusing on this and getting your dog in the tunnel and then leaving where you didn't go in with them as far, you didn't run all the way up to the tunnel like you used to. When we started sending our dogs to the tunnel, the dogs would refuse because and it's surprising because people are always thinking, well, dogs love tunnels. My dog is always going off course to take them. My dog's going out of the way to take them. Oh, and then like the one time I want my dog to go and take it without me, they don't want to take it, right? So I think that probably says a little bit about your handling, but it's just an area where we really need to focus. I think for myself, I really think of tunnels. I've gotten a lot better about getting off of jumps, weave poles, things like that. But the tunnel, I just always watch my dog go into the tunnel and probably shouldn't be doing that.
Yeah, it's dull. It's like triply ironic because number one, it's probably one of the obstacles where your dog has some of the best, the average dog has some of the best commitment to a tunnel. It's also doubly ironic because once they go in, they can't see you. So you sitting there and supporting that tunnel matters not at all at that point, right? They've lost that visual connection. But I think that one thing that you said is very interesting or brings up a good point, which is it's not like you're either reacting or anticipating and you flip from one to the other. It's kind of this spectrum where you're going to slowly and anticipate a little bit more until you are able to create this great commitment on your dog. You can't go from, running all the way up to the tunnel entrance to now just telling them tunnel and running in the opposite direction and from one to the next. You can't just go, all the way in one session. You've got to build that up over time. And so I think that's why one of the things that we advocate is to constantly push your timing. And another way of saying that is constantly work on anticipating a little more. And what's going to happen is your dog will tell you if it's too much, right? If you anticipate too much, if you pull off of a jump and your dog pulls off with you, it's not the end of the world. It just means they needed a little bit more support. Not all the way back to reactive handling, right? They just needed a little bit more than whatever it was that time. It's just information. Mm-hmm. And now and that's how over time you can create this way of handling where you are able to anticipate in a lot of spots and feel very comfortable with it.
Well, I have two comments. So comment number one is, even one handler, I'll take myself as an example, has different commitment points for different maneuvers. So if my dog is going to do a wrap or a jump, my commitment, or my anticipation is pretty good. I trust that dog. I think they're going to take it. But if it's a backside, especially a difficult one, where I'm coming from some out of position spot, I know that at big competitions, especially, my trust of the dog really shrinks up, right? And I want to be right there to manage that backside and make sure I'm blocking their view of that jump. And so, I think even for one handler, different maneuvers, right? You have different levels of trust, newer skills or skills you don't trust as much are there. And it might even change from trial to trial, even for the same skill, right? Yeah, I trust backsides a little more in practice, a little less in a trial, and really much less at a big event. Right. So you're going to do everything you can to manage that. Yeah. And then my second comment, I'm totally blanking on.
Well, I'll comment on your first one while you try to think about it. But because I think one important thing to point out is your ability to be more reactive in your backside handling depends on you anticipating more earlier in the course to put yourself in the position to be more reactive about the backside. So I think it's a great point that you made, that not all handling is equal, not all maneuvers are equal, not all parts of the course are equal, but to be able to be close to your dog and to be a little bit more reactive in one spot usually means you have to be more trusting in earlier spots of the course.
So you had made the comment, this is kind of for both of you, about, Esteban, you mentioned there are certain skills that you trust more and anticipate more and kind of different points on course. So my question is there any place on a course, whether it be an obstacle or a skill, in which you guys find reacting to be best? Because I can think of at least one scenario in which case I would want to react as opposed to anticipate. So is there anywhere where you would use more of a reaction-based handling?
So I think in general, timing is better to anticipate. I think that criteria is best to be reactive. So, in general, I'm going to be telling more advanced competitors, you need to trust, you need to anticipate, you need to move on to the next part of the course. But a big exception to that might be contact criteria, where I think the vast majority of handlers actually switch to anticipating when they should be reacting, even from the very beginning. They anticipate that their dog is going to hit that 2-on, 2-off position, and they go ahead and they release the dog before the dog ever actually made position. And I know that as instructors, all three of us have looked at videos where somebody was sure their dog hit 2-on, 2-off, and on video review, they did not. The person thought it was about to happen. They're pumped up, they have the adrenaline, they're running, and they release the dog, and the dog never actually met criteria.
That's exactly the scenario I had in mind when I asked the question and I guess maybe when I asked the question of handling, that's not the right word, because here we're not really talking handling. We are talking, you use the word criteria, and I like that. But I see the same thing happening so frequently with the 2-on, 2-off, is people anticipating that the dog did it, or expecting that the dog did it or was going to do it, and actually releasing too early. So that is one place where I would encourage handlers in the early stages to be more reactive. See that the dog did the 2-on, 2-off, like physically look over and see in your head, oh, look, they are in a 2-on, 2-off, and then react to that position by releasing, whether it be running ahead as it's at the end of a course and people get excited about the finish, or running into a blind cross. I see it all the time in my classes. People do a blind cross, and as soon as they've crossed the dog's line, and so the dog is on the new side, they just immediately release. And I'll even get done with the sequence and say, so what'd you think of that 2-on, 2-off? And they're looking at me, oh, I don't really know. I thought he'd do it. I just thought I expected that he's going to do it. And he never was in a 2-on, 2-off, whether they stopped early and did a 4-on, or whether they ran off the end. So, when you're talking more criteria based, I think more reaction, where handling, I think more anticipation.
That's super interesting. Tell me what you think of this as well. So there's a big difference, I think, between running contacts and stop contacts, say for the dog walk. So if I'm doing a stop contact in the olden days, or with my stop contact dog, I definitely am reactive. I'm trying to do as you are recommending here. But then with running contacts, I got to say, at least half the time, probably more like 2/3 of the time, I never even see her come down that plane, because I have to get into position for the next part of the course. Otherwise, it doesn't matter. I may see her do it, but then we're immediately going to have a problem.
Well, I think there.
So there, you're anticipating and you're not reacting,
right? But I think there. I think one way to think about it is that handlers have a job to do during the performance of a stopped contact, which is. Some handlers will actually cue the stop, but also the release, right? So you, the handler, are involved with the performance. And so you're kind of responsible for that performance, and you have to, and you have timing that has to happen. Whereas in a running contact, you, the handler, have no responsibility over the contact. As soon as you've cued the beginning of
there
it,
is no release per se.
there is no
built
release
into the behavior.
Right. And so I think that's the
There's
huge
nothing
difference
that you have to react to.
Exactly. Right.
Yeah.
And even just the cueing, right? So a dog comes into a 2-on-2 off. I'm not going to cue the next obstacle till after the 2-on-2 off. But running contact, you're going to cue that next behavior while the dog's still on the dog walk, like on the flat part, or as they begin the descent, you're already telling them back, around, push, whatever, which you're not going to do for a 2-on-2 off, right? A 2-on-2 off, you let the obstacle finish and then cue the response.
Right, exactly. I think one other place that I think that people should react rather than anticipate, you made me think of it when you were talking about they're getting near the end and they're excited. The last jump. Do not anticipate that your dog is done on the last jump because you have nowhere else you have to tell them to go. So this is the one case where you don't have to anticipate for your good timing. Instead, you need to react to your dog already being completely finished with that bar, running on the flat, right? Before you do anything to alter your handling. So I always tell people to imagine a spot.
You're saying don't slow down.
Don't slow down. Don't
Celebrate. Throw your hands in the air.
Right. I always say because people think of the course is over when the dog takes the final obstacle, but it's really not over until they finish the final obstacle. And so I always tell them, imagine a spot 6 feet past and just pretend that's where the electronics eyes are, right? 6 feet past the jump. And when you're done there, then your job is done.
We used to have to do it that way. Back in the day, there was no electronic timers. It was that line across the start and finish, and you had to run all the way out.
Okay, I have good news for you. I remembered my thought.
Oh, good.
I'm very happy about it too. Okay, so my thought was this. The rules in agility actually favor us being reactive, because if your dog turns wide because you didn't anticipate on time, right? Basically, you're reacting super late. Your dog takes a wide turn, you're still good. You're going to qualify. You're going to get your title. You're going to get your ribbon. You're going to place. If you anticipate and your dog pulls off a jump or an obstacle and you get a refusal, you're done. You're out. That's a 0 run. You've just lost, right? So it's a max punishment for people who anticipate too early. And there's a very small penalty, which is a wide turn in just a little bit of time, if you are too much on the reactive side, right?
I think we need to be clear that you're talking AKC rules.
Yes.
Okay, you said agility rules. So, because like in CPE, refusals aren't faulted.
Yes.
Uh-huh.
So depending on the organization or whatever game you're playing.
Right.
Yes. But in general, I do agree with you. But in general, you're right. You're favored more for the wide turn than the refusal, but depends on the class of the game. Right. Challengers round.
Yeah, that's true.
Might not be.
I think also though that
I think we should get rid of refusals. Now that you say that, Jennifer, I'm like, let's just get rid of them.
I
don't know about all that.
I'm kind of
refusals.
I don't know about that.
Well, do we not get rid of refusals? Aren't there no refusals in Westminster finals?
Yes, I believe there are no refusals in Westminster.
Yeah, like
finals.
you can your dog refuses and there's no faults.
Right.
It's just like at a time.
At a time. I think here it's it makes me think of I don't know, personality types or kids, raising kids. Like, are you intrinsically motivated or what's the opposite of
extrinsically?
Extrinsically. Oh, okay, good. Motivated, meaning are you motivated by the rules and the ribbons and the cues as laid out by the organization, or are you motivated to have the best, fastest, smoothest, most exciting run with your dog? And so I think that people who are extrinsically motivated may have trouble with switching to that anticipation because occasionally they are punished for it. People that are intrinsically motivated have a little bit of an easier time seeing all of the benefit. But I think that people who do kind of get stuck in that reactive type of handling, while they may cue, they will often say, well, how can I be faster? How can I be better? How can I get more points per run? And the answer is you've got to start anticipating instead of reacting. I think also that you said the only penalty for reactive handling is like a slightly wider turn, but I think that often handlers are not as good at identifying root causes of errors. And so a lot of errors happen further down the course because of them providing too much support and allowing themselves to get too far behind somewhere else on the course, so that it's not just the wide turn, it's the fact that you couldn't be where you needed to be to handle the tricky part that was 6 obstacles later. And they tend to look at that and say, well, I don't have the skill to handle that tricky bit, or I couldn't, I couldn't possibly get there. But if they had trusted more, had a little bit more anticipation in some of the early spots of the course, they would find that that skill wasn't as tricky, and they would be able to get through it. So I think there's a lot of hidden benefits.
Sure. If you have a really late reaction, actually the max worst thing that's going to happen is your dog's going to immediately go off course.
Right.
Right. If you just react too slowly. I was kind of picking at like kind of the best case scenarios where.
Right.
Yeah, I understand what you're saying.
All right. So hopefully we've given people something to think about. The 2 big things that I want people to take away from this is don't get stuck reacting forever. It is okay to give an inexperienced dog support. I think experienced handlers sometimes they forget that their baby dog is a baby dog, right? And so they don't give quite enough support. But most experienced handlers are going to recognize that pretty quickly and identify that this particular dog needs a little bit more support. But I think there's a large group of handlers that are getting stuck in reactive handling when their dog would be able to handle a more anticipatory style, a more proactive style of handling, and it'll help them get through courses better. And then the other big key point is that the idea of being reactive for criteria. See your dog hold their start. See your dog hit their 2 on 2 off, and make sure, and this goes for training as well, make sure that you're seeing your criteria met so that you can keep your criteria nice and clean and keep the behavior that you've taught and not lose it over time.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And the third thing to remember, if you're going to do a sequence with me and Jennifer and there's a contact in there, we are not only going to comment on the handling, we are looking at that contact. I'm the same way, Jen.
Absolutely.
All right. And that's it for this week's podcast. We'd like to thank our sponsors, 1TDC.com and hititboard.com. Happy training.
Today at the bank, an old lady asked me to check her balance, so I pushed her over.